Hey guys, this is Alli with Alli Christie Counseling and Ask a Therapist, where we answer all the mental health questions you've always wondered about. So for today's question, we're going to talk about the lovely buzzword self-care. So the original question went like this. Hey Alli, I've been hearing a lot about self-care and it seems super fun and all, but I'm really busy and it just seems like another thing that I need to put on top of my already very long to-do list. So, what is self-care exactly, and why is it important? So this is a great question. I get this question from my clients all of the time. And a lot of times when we talk about self-care, or the term self-care, we get images of bubble baths and eating chocolate cake and going to the spa for a day. And while all of these things could count as self-care, a lot of the times they don't get to the actual heart of what self-care is and the purpose. And in a maxed out schedule, when you're just trying to pay the bills and resolve that fight you just had with your partner or your boss, or study for the test you have coming up, going to the spa might seem like a luxury you just can't afford. So today, let's talk about self-care and why it's important. So first off, let's start with a simple definition of self-care. Self-care, simply put, is anything that we do in our lives that reduces the impact of stress. So, seems pretty easy, right? Just reduce your stress. Unfortunately, we have a lot of misconceptions about what self-care means that oftentimes keep us from truly taking care of ourselves. So let's look at those first to see what's getting in our way of actually practicing self-care. The first myth is that self-care is something that we just need to add on to our to-do list. And when we're already maxed out, that can be a stressful thought. Sometimes we can hear a lot of tips about what's good for us, eating healthy, go to the gym, work out, sleep this much every single day, and it can feel exhausting and overwhelming. So while we're going to specialize in a future video about how to do self-care in an already packed schedule, self-care is much more about knowing, being able to identify and know what reduces stress in your life and being able to follow through on those things when you're feeling the stress. A second myth is that self-care is all about treating yourself, about self-indulgence. And while it can be fun to eat a piece of chocolate cake every now and then, going on a spending spree and spending thousands of dollars that eventually leads you to much more stress is not actually self-care. This can often look like the over-the-top version of treating yourself, where you self-indulge, you stay up all hours of the night, you go out binge drinking, and it's super fun for one night, but then you reap the consequences later. The third myth about self-care is that it's being selfish. So self-care can be especially difficult for people who are people pleasers. These are people who want to make everyone around them happy. And making self-care a priority can often feel selfish, in that I feel like I'm putting my needs ahead of someone else's. But self-care, and when you do it in a balanced way, is not selfish. Selfishness is when you're not concerned about others and you're only concerned, or you're only primarily concerned with your own profit and wants and needs. But self-care, good self-care, is what enables you to show up best for the other people in your lives. So imagine you're a bucket, and every time you hang out with someone else, every time you care for someone, every time you go to work, you're pouring out of your bucket. And if you are completely dry, if there's nothing in your bucket to pour out to your kids or your partner or your school, if you're completely depleted, you're not going to be very effective. So when you practice self-care, you're actually allowing yourself to get yourself what you need to fill up in order to function at your full capacity. So ultimately, self-care is not selfish. It's being aware of your limits and knowing what you can do to help to be at full capacity for the people around you. The last myth is the one of escapism and guilty pleasures. This might be something like staying up all night watching your favorite TV show. Drugs, alcohol. Real self-care is setting aside the instant gratification of things that just let us escape from our stress, and change instead to things that actually fill us. So now that we've looked at some things that self-care is not, let's look at a few things that self-care is. The first one of these is having boundaries in our life. So a lot of times we think of self-care as an activity or something that we do or treat ourselves with. But instead, a lot of times, good self-care looks like limiting toxicity in our lives. This could be limiting the amount of time we spend with someone who really drains us consistently. It could be finally looking at your budget and figuring out how to do finances in a way that sets limits so that you aren't completely overwhelmed and stressed by money all the time. A lot of us really struggle with the word no, meaning we don't know when to say no. And our schedules can be maxed out, and this great opportunity comes along and we say yes, because it's another good thing. A lot of the times we're not saying no to things that are easy to say no to. It's good things that we want to be part of. But a good part of being able to do self-care is knowing your limits and knowing when to say no. Another part of boundaries is the topic of balance. So I like to think of this as a lot of times our lives, it's not that we have to add a ton or subtract a ton to our lives, but it's part of like bringing the things that are already in our lives more into balance. So for me, this could look like I really enjoy social media, but it's really frustrating to me when I spend a lot of time on social media, because I felt like I wasted a lot of time, and then I'm frustrated that I spent so much time on Facebook or Instagram. And so for me, bringing more balance into my life might look like, you know what, I'm going to just set some structure. I'm going to set a boundary around the amount of time I spend on Facebook, and I can be on there 30 minutes a day and call it good. So the next principle of self-care is what I call going back to the basics. And the basics are not traditionally what we think of as self-care. It could literally include eating a meal, going to sleep, maybe even showering or brushing your teeth. These are the kinds of things that we oftentimes forget to do when we are under a lot of stress. And then when we forget to do those things, it's this perpetuating cycle. So we don't eat, and then our bodies feel gross, we feel weak, or we don't shower, and then it goes back into us feeling more stressed or more gross or more bad about ourselves, and then we don't actually get to take care of ourselves. So that second principle of basics, easy to forget, and simple steps that can be put back into our lives to help us take care of ourselves. So the final principle is probably more traditionally one we think of when we think of self-care. And that means the things that fill us up, the things that give us rest and rejuvenate us when we're feeling stressed out. So this category could be so many things. It could literally be taking a 20-minute nap, or it could be taking a walk for 20 minutes. It could be taking a walk for an hour, or driving up into the mountains, or scheduling a day off of work just to get a break. You probably know several things right now that when you do those things, they don't have to be extravagant, but you can think of them and it's like, oh yeah, after I do that thing, that really fills me up, that I really feel rejuvenated, or I know this thing's good for me. And what fits that category for you may not be the same thing as the person next to you. So next time we're going to talk about what are those things that really help me feel rejuvenated and restful and are self-care for me, that are not going to be the same as my partner, but really help me feel filled up. So in summary, self-care is not another thing on your to-do list. It's not over self-indulgence. It's not selfishness, and it's not escapism. But instead, self-care is boundaries and finding balance within those boundaries, going back to the basics, and then finally finding things that fill you up and rejuvenate you. If you have a question you'd like answered by a therapist, feel free to post below, and like, share, and subscribe for more content. Thanks!